Warner Bros. Discovery says Paramount made higher bid, board will weigh offer against Netflix deal. Written by Alex Sherman, published by CNBC. Warner Bros. Discovery on Tuesday said it had received a higher takeover offer from Paramount Skydance and will review the new bid under the terms of its existing deal with Netflix. Last week, WBD announced it would re-engage Paramount in deal talks under a 7-day waiver from Netflix. WBD and Netflix have an agreement to sell the Legacy Media Group's studio and streaming businesses to the streamer. Paramount is seeking to buy the entirety of WBD. Quote, following engagement with PSKY during the 7-day limited waiver period, we received a revised PSKY proposal to acquire WBD, which we are reviewing in consultation with our financial and legal advisors. End quote. We will update our shareholders following the board's review. The Netflix merger agreement remains in effect, and the board continues to recommend in favor of the Netflix transaction. WBD shareholders are advised not to take any action at this time with respect to the amended PSKY tender offer. Paramount is, in a statement, confirmed it had submitted a revised bid and said it will continue with its previously announced tender offer while the WBD board reviews both deals. If WBD deems the new Paramount offer superior, Netflix will have 4 days to improve its previously agreed upon bid. Netflix agreed to acquire WBD studio and streaming assets for $27.75 per share in December, valuing the assets around $72 billion USD, with a total enterprise value of approximately $82.7 billion. Paramount subsequently launched a hostile tender offer to WBD shareholders for $30 per share for all of WBD, which includes linear cable networks such as CNN, TBS, HGTV, and TNT, and digital assets including Bleacher Report and House of Highlights. If WBD concludes Paramount's new offer is superior and Netflix doesn't alter its bid, Netflix will receive a $2.8 billion breakup fee. Paramount has agreed to fund that fee as part of a previously altered hostile bid. A combined Paramount WBD would bring together HBO Max with Paramount Plus, along with merging 2 of the 5 largest movie studios by revenue, Warner Bros. And Paramount Skydance Studios. It would also put CNN and CBS News under one ownership structure. Both the Netflix WBD deal and a potential Paramount WBD merger would need US and European regulatory approval for completion, and both deals have raised antitrust concerns among critics. Afghanistan bombing, what's Pakistan's strategy as India-Taliban ties grow? Written by Abed Hussein, published by Al Jazeera. Islamabad, Pakistan. In the weeks before the Pakistani military carried out air raids inside Afghanistan over the weekend, violence had been unrelenting. On February 6th, the suicide bomber detonated explosives during Friday prayers at a Shia mosque in the capital, Islamabad, killing at least 36 worshippers and wounding 170 others. Days later, an explosives-laden vehicle rammed a security post in Bajar in the northwestern provinces of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, killing 11 soldiers and a child. The attacker, according to Pakistani authorities, was later identified as an Afghan national. After the Bajar attack, Pakistan's Ministry of Foreign Affairs issued a démarche to the Taliban authorities on February 19th, summoning the Afghan deputy head of mission in Islamabad. But 2 days later, in the early hours of Saturday, another suicide bomber struck a security convoy in Banu, also in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, killing 2 soldiers, including a lieutenant colonel. Pakistan's patience appeared to have run out, and early on Sunday, the military struck back, targeting what it described as camps and hideouts in Afghan border areas. According to Pakistani authorities, air raids in Afghanistan's Nangarhar and Paktika provinces targeted sanctuaries of Pakistan Taliban, or TTP, and its affiliates, killing at least 80 militants in intelligence-based airstrikes along the Pakistan-Afghanistan border, targeting 7 camps. Kabul has rejected those claims. The Afghan Ministry of Defense said the strikes hit a religious school and residential homes, killing and wounding dozens, including women and children. Afghan sources told Al Jazeera that at least 17 people were killed in Nangarhar alone. Kabul pledged a measured and appropriate response. Later on Sunday, India entered the picture, condemning the Pakistani military action and throwing in its support for Afghanistan's sovereignty and territorial integrity. India strongly condemns Pakistan's airstrikes on Afghan territory that have resulted in civilian casualties, including women and children, during the holy month of Ramadan. Ministry of External Affairs spokesperson Ranhir Jaiswal said, "It is another attempt by Pakistan to externalize its internal failures," he said. In many ways, the statement from New Delhi underscored the unease in Islamabad over India's growing engagement with Taliban-ruled Afghanistan, an emerging partnership between two countries that Pakistan has repeatedly blamed in recent months for its domestic security turmoil. Pakistan's Ministry of Information and Broadcasting, in a statement issued on Sunday, said it had conclusive evidence that the recent attacks on its soil were carried out by fighters and suicide bombers acting on the behest of their Afghanistan-based leadership and handlers. It said Islamabad had repeatedly urged Kabul to take verifiable steps to prevent armed groups from Afghan soil, but that no substantive action had followed. Quote, "Pakistan has always strived to maintain peace and stability in the region, but the safety and security of Pakistani citizens remains its top priority," the statement read. Pakistan's attack shattered a fragile ceasefire brokered by Qatar and Turkey after talks in October and November, following early rounds of deadly border clashes. The discussions last year had failed to produce a formal peace agreement, and calm along the frontier remained tenuous. The Taliban government in Afghanistan has repeatedly rejected allegations that it is supporting armed groups that attack Pakistan. But as far back as October last year, the Pakistan military spokesperson Ahmed Sharif Chaudhry had warned that Islamabad's patience was wearing thin. Afghanistan is being used as a base of operations against Pakistan, and there is proof and evidence of that. The necessary measures that should be taken to protect the lives and property of the people of Pakistan will be taken and will continue to be taken, he said during a press briefing without presenting evidence publicly. Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif, after a suicide bombing outside a district court in Islamabad in November, had also stressed the need for cooperation from Kabul. Afghanistan must understand the lasting peace can only be realized by reining in TTP and other terrorist groups operating from Afghan territory, he said. The TTP, which emerged in 2007, is distinct from the Taliban in Afghanistan, but shares deep ideological, social, and linguistic ties with the group. Pakistan accuses the Taliban of providing sanctuary to the TTP on Afghan soil, a charge Kabul denies. Abdul Basit, a scholar at the International Center for Political Violence and Terrorism Research at Singapore's Rajaratnam School of International Studies, said Pakistan's attack confirms the collapse of the temporary ceasefire that followed the talks late last year. Basit questioned the logic behind Pakistan's bombings. The more Pakistan will strike in Afghanistan, the more Kabul and TTP will come closer, he told Al Jazeera. At the same time, Basit said he understood Pakistan's dilemma. They have to retaliate after losing so many security personnel, he said, describing Pakistan as being left between bad and worse options. The losses for Pakistan in recent months have been steep. Last year was among the deadliest in nearly a decade, with 699 attacks recorded nationwide, a 34% increase from the previous year, according to the Pak Institute for Peace Studies. In 2025, security reports said at least 1,034 people were killed in the renewed wave of violence, marking a 21% rise in terrorism-related fatalities. In addition, 1,366 people were injured over the course of the year, underscoring the growing human cost of terrorism, the report said. Cross-border air raids are not new. A similar operation in December 2024 killed at least 46 people, most of them civilians. That episode prompted sharp warnings from Kabul, but attacks on Pakistani soil, blamed by Islamabad on the TTP, continued. Some experts said Pakistan's strategy needed to involve more than military pressure on the Taliban. Fahad Nabil, who heads the Islamabad-based research consultancy Geopolitical Insights, said Pakistan must also work to build goodwill among Afghans. Quote, "Reopening the border and resuming bilateral trade are two possible measures that Pakistan can adopt. Pakistan also needs to share actionable intelligence with allied countries like China, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and Turkey to increase pressure on the Afghan Taliban and to act against anti-Pakistan military groups," end quote. An intriguing dimension of the crisis has been not only who Pakistan targeted, but who responded. India, Pakistan's nuclear-armed rival, condemned the air raids and highlighted civilian casualties in Afghanistan while remaining silent on the attacks inside Pakistan that preceded them. For officials in Islamabad, New Delhi's statement reinforced a perception that India and the Taliban authorities are edging closer in ways that complicate Pakistan's security calculus. That shift has gathered pace over the past year. Afghan Foreign Minister Amir Khan Muttaqi's 6-day visit to India last October marked the first trip by a senior Taliban official since the group returned to power in 2021. India reopened its embassy in Kabul during the same period. When a magnitude 6.3 earthquake struck northern Afghanistan weeks later, India was among the first to send aid and later gifted ambulances to Kabul, gestures closely watched in Islamabad. Pakistan's Defense Minister Khawaja Asif claimed in October that India had penetrated the Taliban leadership and suggested that Kabul's growing ties with New Delhi made it less willing to cut ties with the TTP. He offered no public evidence to back his claims. Bassett said while Pakistan's attacks on Afghanistan would amount to India's gain, drawing the Taliban and New Delhi closer with the shared enemy in Islamabad, India faced limitations imposed by geography. It can provide humanitarian support to Afghanistan, but nothing more than that, he said. Still, Nabil agreed Pakistani policymakers need clarity on how to address armed groups operating from Afghan soil. Pakistan cannot afford to keep both borders with Afghanistan and India engaged at a time when the prospects of military confrontation between the U.S. and Iran are growing with each passing day, he said, referring to rising tensions in the Middle East. Pakistan's eastern border with India has remained tense since the two countries had a 4-day military confrontation in May last year after an attack on tourists in Pahalgam, in Indian-administered Kashmir, in which 26 people were killed. India blamed Pakistan, which denied any role. To the west, the Taliban government shows little sign of acting decisively against the TTP, says Pakistani officials. At home, a surge in attacks, including in big cities, has intensified public pressure on the military to respond forcefully. Sunday's air raids were intended to project strength to Kabul, say experts. Whether they amount to a coherent long-term strategy is less clear, especially as the Taliban has pledged retaliation. But Bassett pointed out that the Taliban leadership also needs to project strength domestically and respond to entrenched anti-Pakistan sentiment among Afghans. Quote, Kabul is well within its rights to respond, considering it is a matter of their own sovereignty, but also because by doing that, the public will rally behind them and increase their domestic legitimacy, as we saw in the last cycle of attacks. End quote. China issues dual-use blacklist of 20 Japanese entities, written by Francis Tang, published by the Japan Times. China's Commerce Ministry on Tuesday released 2 lists of Japanese companies, institutions, and agencies for which exports will require special government permission. A blacklist of 20 entities participating in enhancing Japan's military capabilities was issued. It includes Mitsubishi Shipbuilding and several Mitsubishi heavy industry subsidiaries, several IHI Corporation companies, the National Defense Academy and JAXA, and Japan's Space Agency. Exporters are prohibited from exporting dual-use items to these companies and organizations, and groups or individuals overseas are also prohibited from transferring or providing them with such items originating from China. Any ongoing efforts must be ceased immediately, the Commerce Ministry said. Exporters should apply to the Commerce Ministry for approval where export is necessary under special circumstances, it added. A watch list was also issued listing 20 Japanese entities. These include car makers such as Subaru and Hino Motors, electric machinery makers such as Nitto Denko and Yashimi Denki, INEOS, and the Institute of Science, Tokyo. Exporters will need to submit individual applications for exporting dual-use items to these entities, along with a risk assessment report and a written commitment stating that such exports will not be used for purposes enhancing Japan's military capabilities. Companies on the watch list may be removed from the list on an application basis. Beijing said the purpose of the move is to address Japan's remilitarization and nuclear ambitions, adding that these measures are justified, reasonable, and lawful. Quote, China's decision to list entities in accordance with the law targets only a small number of Japanese entities, and the relevant measures apply only to dual-use items. End quote. A ministry spokesperson said in a written statement on Tuesday. They do not affect normal China-Japan economic and trade exchanges. Japanese entities that operate with integrity and in compliance with the law have no need for concern, the statement continued. The move was the latest in a series of escalating measures undertaken by Beijing since Prime Minister Sanae Takahashi made remarks in Parliament in November that Japan could intervene militarily if China attacks Taiwan. China announced a ban on exporting dual-use items to Japan in January, but did not give a clear picture of what specific companies or items will be affected. It has also encouraged its citizens to avoid travel to Japan, and it has halted imports of Japanese seafood. These measures specifically target Japan, differ significantly from international practice, and are by no means acceptable. Deputy Chief Cabinet Secretary Kai Sato said of the January dual-use ban announcement Tuesday afternoon. Masaki Kanai, the Foreign Ministry's Director General of the Asian and Oceanian Affairs Bureau, lodged a protest with Shi Yong, the Deputy Chief of Mission at the Chinese Embassy, on the same day. Chinese dual-use export control list, which was recently updated, features more than 800 items in 10 categories and includes not only key products, components, and technologies with obvious military uses and applications, i.e. chemicals, minerals, electronics, sensors, navigation systems, software, and aerospace technologies, but also a host of routine products that are more closely associated with commercial endeavors and consumer use, including high-speed cameras. Rare earth elements, which are used in a wide range of high-tech areas that range from precision-guided weapons and satellites to electric vehicles and computer chips, are a major component of that list. We will carefully examine the details and potential impact of the latest measures and take necessary responses accordingly, Sato added. The share prices of affected companies declined Tuesday. Mitsubishi Heavy Industries finished the day down 3.1%. IHI Corporation was down 5.73%, and Kawasaki Heavy Industries was down 4.02%. Justice Department withheld and removed some Epstein files related to Trump. Written by Stephen Fowler, published by NPR. The Justice Department has withheld some Epstein files related to allegations that President Trump sexually abused a minor, an NPR investigation finds. It also removed some documents from the public database where accusations against Jeffrey Epstein also mention Trump. Some files have not been made public despite a law mandating their release. These include what appears to be more than 50 pages of FBI interviews and notes from conversations with a woman who accused Trump of sexual abuse decades ago when she was a minor. NPR reviewed multiple sets of unique serial numbers appearing before and after the pages in question, stamped onto documents in the Epstein Files database, FBI case records, emails, and discovery document logs in the latest tranche of documents published at the end of January. NPR's investigation found dozens of pages that appear to be cataloged by the Justice Department but not shared publicly. The Justice Department declined to answer NPR's questions on the record about these specific files, what's in them, and why they are not published. Other files scrubbed from public view pertain to a separate woman who was a key witness for the prosecution in the criminal trial of Epstein's co-conspirator, Ghislaine Maxwell, who was serving a 20-year prison sentence for sex trafficking. Maxwell is seeking clemency from Trump. Some of those documents were briefly taken down and put back online last week, while others remain hidden, according to NPR's comparison of the initial data set from January 30th with document metadata of those files currently on the Justice Department website. NPR does not name victims of sexual abuse. When asked for comment about the missing pages and the accusations against the president, a White House spokeswoman told NPR that Trump has done more for Epstein's victims than anyone before him. Just as President Trump has said, he's been totally exonerated on anything relating to Epstein. White House spokeswoman Abigail Jackson told NPR in a statement, quote, and by releasing thousands of pages of documents, cooperating with the House Oversight Committee's subpoena request, signing the Epstein Files Transparency Act, and calling for more investigations into Epstein's Democrat friends, President Trump has done more for Epstein's victims than anyone before him. Meanwhile, Democrats like Hakeem Jeffries and Stacey Plaskett have yet to explain why they were soliciting money and meetings from Epstein after he was a convicted sex offender, end quote. The White House has previously pointed to a statement from the Justice Department that says the Epstein files contain untrue and sensationalist claims about the president. In a letter to members of Congress on February 14th, first reported by Politico, Attorney General Pam Bondi and Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche insist that no records were withheld or redacted on the basis of embarrassment, reputational harm, or political sensitivity, including to any government official, public figure, or foreign dignitary. In the last 2 weeks, as lawmakers have begun to view unredacted copies of Epstein files, members of both parties have criticized the way the Trump administration has handled the release of the files. They have also continued to accuse the Justice Department of violating the law and operating without transparency in redacting information. According to the newly released files, the FBI internally circulated Epstein-related allegations that mentioned Trump in late July and early August 2025. The list, collected from the FBI's National Threat Operations Center, included numerous salacious allegations. Agents marked most of the accusations as unverifiable or not credible. But one lead was sent to the FBI's Washington office with the purpose of setting up an interview with the accuser. The lead was included in an internal PowerPoint slide deck detailing prominent names in the Epstein and Maxwell investigations last fall. The woman who directly named Trump in her abuse allegation claimed that around 1983, when she was around 13 years old, Epstein introduced her to Trump, quote, who subsequently forced her head down to his exposed penis, which she subsequently bit. In response, Trump punched her in the head and kicked her out, end quote. Out of more than 3 million pages of files released by the Justice Department in recent months, this specific allegation against Trump only appears in copies of the FBI list of claims and the DOJ slideshow. But a review of FBI case file logs and discovery documents turned over to Maxwell and her attorneys in the criminal case against her point to one place the claim could have come from, and how serious investigators took it. The FBI interviewed this Trump and Epstein accuser 4 times. That is according to an FBI serial report and a list of non-testifying witness material in the Maxwell case that were also released under the Epstein Files Transparency Act. Only the first interview, conducted July 24, 2019, is in the public database. That interview does not mention Trump. Of 15 documents listed in a log of the Maxwell discovery material for this first accuser, only 7 are in the Epstein Files database. Those missing also include notes that accompany 3 of the interviews. The discrepancy in the file for the Trump accuser was first reported by independent journalist Roger Sollenberger. According to NPR's review of 3 different sets of serial numbers stamped onto the files, there appear to be 53 pages of interview documents and notes missing from the public Epstein database. In the first interview document, the woman discussed ways Epstein abused her as a girl, and, in identifying him to investigators, showed a cropped photo of the disgraced financier. Her attorney said it was cropped because she was concerned about implicating additional individuals, and specifically, any that were well known due to fear of retaliation. The FBI agents noted it was a widely distributed photograph of Epstein with Trump. A woman whose biographical details and description of Epstein's abuse found in the FBI interview also line up with details from a victim lawsuit. In the December 2019 filing, Jane Doe 4 does not mention Trump, and the woman voluntarily dismissed her claims against Epstein's estate in December 2021. Attorneys for the accuser declined to comment. Elsewhere, in the released Epstein files, someone in the FBI wrote on July 22, 2025, before the list and slide presentation were compiled, that Trump's name was in the larger case files, and that one identified victim claimed abuse by Trump, but ultimately refused to cooperate. The other woman whose mention of Trump made the DOJ's presentation appeared in Maxwell discovery files released last month in what's known as a Testifying Witness 3500 material list. In the first interview of 6 with the FBI, conducted between September 2019 and September 2021, the second woman detailed how Epstein and Maxwell's abuse began while she was around 13 years old, attending the Interlochen Center for the Arts, and described how, at one point, Epstein took her to Trump's Mar-a-Lago club to meet him. Epstein told Trump, "This is a good one, huh?" the interview report leads. In a 2020 lawsuit against Epstein's estate and Maxwell, the second woman added that both men chuckled and she felt uncomfortable, but at the same time was too young to understand why. That interview was removed from the DOJ's public files sometime after initial publication on January 30th, and was republished February 19th, according to document metadata. The Justice Department told NPR the only reason any file has been temporarily removed is because it had been flagged by a victim or their counsel for additional review. Multiple FBI interviews with other people refer to the second woman's meeting with Trump while she was a minor and being abused by Epstein. One interview with a fleeting mention of Trump was removed from the public database, subsequently restored last week, while another interview with the woman's mother is still offline. In that conversation, the mother recalled hearing that a prince and Donald Trump visited Epstein's house, which made her think that if they are there, then how could Epstein be a criminal, according to NPR's copy of the file that was first published. The possible omission of files that mention these women's particular allegations against the president come as the Justice Department has warned about other documents it has published in full that includes what it calls untrue and sensationalist claims about Trump. At the same time, the Justice Department has removed and re-uploaded thousands of pages in recent weeks to fix improperly redacted victim names. That includes documents related to the allegations from these two women, who separately say they were around 13 years old when Epstein first abused them. Robert Glassman, who represents the woman who testified against Maxwell, sharply criticized the Justice Department's handling of the Epstein files. "This whole thing is ridiculous," he told NPR. Quote, "The DOJ was ordered to release information to the public to be transparent about Epstein and Maxwell's criminal enterprise network. Instead, they released the names of courageous victims who have fought hard for decades to remain anonymous and out of the limelight. Whether the disclosures were inadvertent or not, they had one job to do, and they didn't do it," end quote. A DOJ spokesperson told NPR that the department is working around the clock to address concerns from victims and handle additional redactions of personally identifiable information that have been flagged. Quote, "In view of the congressional deadline, all reasonable efforts have been made to review and redact personal information pertaining to victims, other private individuals, and protect sensitive materials from disclosure. That said, because of the volume of information involved, this website may nevertheless contain information that inadvertently includes non-public personally identifiable information or other sensitive content to include matters of a sexual nature," end quote, the statement read. 3 Myths About the Russia Economic War. Written by Maximilian Hess, published by Al Jazeera. 4 years after Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, the devastation wrought by the Kremlin's drones, infantry, missiles, and armor continues to be matched by economic destruction. This is a cost borne mostly by Ukraine. The World Bank now estimates the cost of reconstruction, were the war to end today, is now $588 billion USD, nearly 3 times the country's GDP. Simultaneous to the fighting in Ukraine itself, the economic war between Russia and the West rages on, but that battlefield has shifted far more sharply than the one in southern and eastern Ukraine has over the past year. With a war of attrition being waged on the ground, how the geoeconomic battleground plays out from here may well prove more important in determining how the conflict is ultimately settled. The nature of the changes in both sides' economic fighting conditions, however, is obscured by a dense fog of war. This is compounded by the fact that most participants in this economic conflict are increasingly happy to obscure the state of the geoeconomics at play, and to let narratives play out that are more rooted in propaganda and politics than fact. To understand where the war is headed, it could help to bust 3 myths about Russia's current state of economic affairs and Western capabilities. The first is that the economic cost Russia has borne is manageable. The Kremlin may appear willing to wage the war no matter the cost to its coffers and people, but that does not mean that doing so is not devastating its economy. As a result of the 2022 invasion, the Kremlin has lost its largest gas export market, Europe. Before the war, Russia sold roughly 150 billion cubic meters of gas to the EU annually. That number is down to 38. Based on the recent prices for European gas futures, every billion cubic meter is worth more than 300 million euros, meaning Russia is losing out on as much as 34 billion euros annually. That sum will increase next year when EU countries will phase out completely Russian gas imports. Approximately 335 billion USD in Russian sovereign assets remain frozen worldwide as well, although the Kremlin has launched repeated legal challenges to the underpinning sanctions to scare off Ukraine's backers from harnessing these in its defense. Reading between the lines of recent Russian offers and negotiations indicates the Kremlin acknowledges a large portion thereof will never be recovered. The Kremlin has also acknowledged that its remaining domestic piggy bank, the National Wealth Fund, is running dry, and with withdrawals at a record pace at the beginning of the year, could even be spent by year's end, barring a sustained uptick in oil prices. The sole area of the economy that is performing well is that connected to the military and defense production, but sustained high borrowing costs and the decline in employable Russians due to war losses and recruitment mean that the Russian economy continues to bleed too. The second myth that must be dispelled is that the US has lost interest in fighting the economic war against Russia. President Donald Trump may be making offers for Russian-American cooperation if a ceasefire and potential settlement of the conflict are reached, but it is still maintaining the sanctions. In fact, his administration's punitive economic measures are bringing real additional pain to the Kremlin in its sole remaining other major export market, oil. Since Washington imposed sweeping sanctions on Russia's two largest oil companies, Rosneft and Lukoil, in October, early signs suggest the measures are beginning to disrupt the Kremlin's ability to place barrels on global markets. The restrictions blacklisted firms responsible for a large share of Russian crude exports and deterred banks, traders, and refiners from participating in deals, particularly in Asia. The Trump administration may lag well behind Europe in imposing sanctions on Russia's shadow fleet, but it has outpaced Europe in targeting Iran's, meaning there are more black barrels in the market than before. The result has been a growing pool of oil in search of buyers. Cargoes have accumulated, with tens of millions of barrels stranded in storage or on tankers without firm destinations as refiners hesitate to risk sanctions exposure. Not stopping export outright, but forcing a slower and less certain trade in which Russian crude must hunt for buyers and offer increasingly sharp discounts. Therefore, even as the geopolitical risk premium driven by Trump's threat to strike Iran has seen the benchmark Brent oil price reach more than $70 per barrel, Russia has had to offer discounts of as much as $30 per barrel to secure buyers. This is not only a U.S. story. Even in India, where Washington has openly negotiated on tariffs in exchange for decreasing Russian oil purchases, European sanctions have helped heap on the pressure. Brussels significantly sharpened its anti-circumvention measures over the past year, going as far as to target refineries in both China and India. In the later case, the country's second largest refinery, Vadinar, which is part owned by Rosneft, has been blacklisted since the middle of last year. Europe is currently preparing its 20th sanctions package and has proposed going further still, including with an outright ban on providing any support for the trading of Russian crude. That process, however, as well as the crucial €90 billion loan that Brussels agreed to provide Kiev in December, has been delayed by the latest round of intra-EU squabbling, after Hungary extended its veto on the eve of the invasion's anniversary. And therein lies a third myth due for dispelling in retaliation to the ongoing economic war. Europe must be prepared to pay for assistance to Kiev from its own coffers. The EU does have a viable alternative: Russia's frozen assets. In fact, the €90 billion loan plan was itself thrown together at the last minute in December, after the bloc failed to unite on a plan to harness these assets, the lion's share of which is firmly under EU jurisdiction. Negotiations failed last year, but that does not mean they cannot be revisited. With Russia, US, Ukraine diplomatic negotiations making no discernible progress, and both sides girding for fighting to continue unabated into a fifth year, the economic war is set to trundle on as well. To threaten a real collapse of the Russian economy and force Moscow to make concessions on ending the war, the West must take steps it has been unable to so far. The alternative is far worse: striking a deal on the Kremlin's terms that may encourage future aggression.